collective achievements that we're all aiming to do, all in service to our students, to our region, to our state, right? I also just want to say that it's really great to be with you again, because I've been here now in Sacramento. I really do call this home now, even though I'm originally from Southern California. And for me, really thinking about how to better serve not only the students at UC Davis, but really, again, students regionally is important, again, for those various things that I mentioned, that a lot of our students will come to college locally. The students that often want to transfer from your campuses will either want to transfer to us or maybe to Cal State Sacramento State. And so students like to stay regionally, or once students graduate with their undergrad, they often want to go to grad school again locally, or work locally as well, right? Once they're professionals. And so I really am excited to think about more broadly, what does servingness mean in a region, given the collective efforts that we are all engaging with across the causeway. So my goal today is really to just kind of explore this notion of servingness at different levels. I'm gonna go from talking about servingness, thinking about and becoming more aware of this concept individually, as well as what does it mean for a campus to be thinking about servingness at the campus level. And then I also, since the work that you're doing is really now pushing it also at a district level, what does that mean when we start to think about servingness kind of at a broader level? And so I'll share a little bit of the efforts as well that we've been doing within UC that I think can hopefully be instructive or helpful, and that we can also learn from some of the efforts that you're going to engage. And so I really do want to engage in a dialogue with you about that. My goal is to speak maybe for max 50 minutes, and then we can open it for Q&A. I do know, though, as a faculty member, once I get going, it's hard to stop. So I will just keep monitoring, but if you see me going past an hour, please flag me. I give you full permission to do that. So I wanted to start off, so really, again, as I mentioned, I want to talk about this notion of elevating servingness at Hispanic serving community colleges specifically, but really thinking about that from this regional, more systemic district level perspective. It's important, though, to start off, many of you may already know this, but I do want to start off with, let's define what does Hispanic serving institution mean? What is the landscape of HSIs currently with our most current data? So we know currently that there are 571 HSIs that are eligible for this criteria. To become an HSI, institutions have to enroll at least 25% Latinx undergraduate enrollment. This is per federal policy. This is dictated by the federal government and the Higher Education Act. Specifically in 1992 was the first year that the federal government recognized HSIs and indicated that these institutions that tended to enroll large number of Latinx students also needed more resources to actually do the work that they were engaging in, and to start to think about how do we transform institutions to better support those student populations. So that was the birth of HSIs in 1992. Our most current estimates, again, 571 HSIs across the United States and Puerto Rico. These institutions now constitute 19% of all colleges and universities across the state. Almost 1 in 5 colleges is an HSI. Yes.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Fernandez. I think the share screen isn't working. Reshare.
Sorry, it's
Of course.
it's following for you, but not for the folks.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So let's see. Let me just try this again. I apologize.
And I'll just mention, when I first started studying HSIs back in 2007, only 8% of institutions were HSIs across the United States. So if you think about in just a 15-year period, how much growth there has been with HSIs. Now it's working? Okay, perfect. So for those of you dialing in virtually, I was just sharing that there are 571 HSIs across the United States and in Puerto Rico, and that these comprise 19% of all colleges and universities in the United States. Historically, HSIs have been broad access, open access institutions. Again, if we think about that 1992 designation being created, it was specifically to support those colleges that were enrolling high numbers of Latinx undergraduates and had fewer resources. And so those were largely community colleges, as well as broad access four-year universities. However, so in the past, community colleges were actually the majority of HSIs, but that actually hasn't been true for about 10 years now. About 10 years ago, four-year universities constituted the majority of HSIs, and we see this to be the same. Currently, 59% of all HSIs are four-year institutions, but a good proportion are still two-year universities, given, again, the missions of these institutions. The majority of colleges are also public institutions, which adds that layer of thinking about what is the public mission of the particular institution, what are the state policies, right, that influence and affect the different actions that an institution may take. So that's an important context to keep in mind. As well, we know that HSIs, while they enroll a large proportion of Latinx undergraduates, 62% of every Latinx undergraduate attends an HSI. So they're doing the bulk of educating Latinx undergraduate students across the United States. But when we look at who enrolls at HSIs, it's actually a broad representation of students. We have 26% are white, 9% Asian, 9% Black or African American. So it is a much more diverse student population as well, right, that's being educated at these institutions. And so as we strive to think about how we better support and elevate the success of Latinx students, we're also talking about elevating the success of other racially minoritized groups as well. So I just want to have this as context and background about, well, what is an HSI? So an HSI has these very clear federal definitions, right? If you meet these criteria, you become eligible for certain funding opportunities. Again, those opportunities are intended to enhance what we call now servingness at these institutions. It means to advance the educational opportunities of Latinx students and the students that attend these institutions. But what does servingness really mean? And that's really where this notion of HSI and servingness becomes a little bit more complex. How do we define it? How do we know that we're achieving it? How do we know that we're making progress? And so that's where I want to spend a little bit of time now in terms of even just sharing my own journey into thinking about these questions of what does servingness mean, right? Mind you that we're trying to change institutions that have been historically white, created in a time where students of color, Latinx students weren't necessarily accessing many of these institutions. And what we're trying to really think about is, well, how do we transform those institutions to really serve the student population that is there today? That means that sometimes the structure that was created may not necessarily be the structure that we need to do moving forward. And HSI, I think, creates an opportunity for us to really think about, well, what is it that our students really need today? And how can we create institutions that meet those needs moving forward? So for me, as I've thought about what does servingness mean, I want to share with you a little bit here about, do these visuals look familiar to any of you? Okay, what is this? The causeway, right? The famous causeway here in Sacramento. So a few months ago, I had the opportunity, actually last summer, I had the opportunity to be a guest on Gina Garcia's HSI podcast, ¿Qué pasa HSIs? How many of you listened to the podcast? Okay, several of you in the room. I hope those of you dialing in or virtually, that you also add this as a resource, because it's a great opportunity to learn how different, either whether it be campus leaders, scholars, or students themselves think about servingness from these different perspectives. And Gina does a phenomenal job really thinking about how servingness can be construed so uniquely, depending on the context of the institution, as well as depending on the context of who's responding to this question. So I encourage you to listen in on this podcast. One of the things that I appreciated from the podcast is that this is a question that she asks every speaker. And it was, I think, for me, it has really been a powerful question that I continue to think about. And I know a question that I will have to think about moving forward for the rest of my career. And I would invite each of us, not only individually, but our campuses themselves, how would we describe our journey towards servingness? So the specific question she begins to ask is, how did HSIs come to your consciousness? And what has been your servingness journey? So when I've been thinking about this question, it really has prompted me to think about metaphors. And for me in this region, I think the causeway is a good metaphor. And I don't know if any of you have seen me talk about this before, because I've shared it once before in this area. But why am I talking about the causeway? Why does the causeway connect to this particular question? So for me, if we think about the causeway, when was it built? 1962, okay? Many of our institutions in the area were built in the same time period. I do know from my brief Wikipedia search of learning a little bit more about the causeway is that it was originally built in 1960, but in the ways that we know it today from these visuals, it actually goes to 1962. However, how many of you travel the causeway often? Okay, you got to time, right, when you're passing that causeway, because if you don't time it right, sometimes we face no barriers, you can fly by, right? Like this earlier shot up there, or this side of the freeway. Other times you're going to be sitting in that causeway for a long time, right? Especially on a Friday afternoon or a Sunday or any weekend in particular time periods, right? Either direction, depending if folks are going to San Francisco or folks are coming back from Lake Tahoe, right? Going back home. So the causeway really in a lot of ways was built in 1962 for the traffic of 1962. It's not necessarily built for the traffic of today, right? And that's why we face these barriers at times, right? In addition to that, we know that there's potholes. How many of you have hit those potholes on that causeway, right? And I know this causeway because I used to live in Sacramento in Natomas and commute to Davis. And it literally had to be, well, let me try to get on this road at the right time to see if I could get there. Otherwise, I'm going to be sitting in traffic. So for me, sometimes I would get stuck on that causeway. Sometimes it was me causing the backup in that causeway, right? So thinking about all of these things that affect like our ability to get from one side to another, for me, mimics what happens in a lot of our institutions as well. Again, most of our institutions were built in the 1960s. They weren't necessarily built with the students that we have today in mind. How many students do we find that face barriers? Or depending on the kind of information they receive, they may not experience challenges, or they may experience challenges. So for me, this really kind of mimics in some way how we can think about servingness, because I think within our institutions, it can work, it can feel that way as well. I was excited to hear, though, that there's causeway renovations currently underway, right? Did you all hear about this? They broke ground last week. They're going to be doing renovations for the next few years. It's like a couple $100 million project. And one of the things that was really exciting to hear that I think, again, kind of pushes my thinking on this metaphor a little bit more is that one of the leads on that project said that their goal is to repave is not just to repave areas, but to really restructure ramps and remove barriers. And so for me, I just think if the causeway is doing that, then our institutions should also be doing that as well. So why am I talking about this notion of the causeway as a metaphor? Because again, our institutions were built at a time period that they're serving very different students today. And so I think just in the same way that certain metaphors in our region can inform how we have to think about how to restructure ramps on the causeway to make it more effective and efficient for today, our institutions in the same way need to change in that way. And again, HSI as a concept, this notion of moving towards a journey of servingness helps us think about how can we remove barriers and how can we pave the better college system for the next 40 years versus just kind of repairing small things and tinkering at the edges. And so I think that for me, that really reflects this notion of like what servingness could be, what a journey towards servingness can be. And it is one of transformation, literal transformation. So when I think about my own journey of servingness, going to like my individual consciousness, for me, I have to share, I did not attend an HSI. How many of you attended an HSI as an undergrad? Okay, we have one person, two people, right? Did you know it was an HSI at the time? No, I'm saying no, right? But many of us have not attended an HSI. So this consciousness of what does it mean, we have to build it in our own minds as well, right? So for me, I did not attend an HSI as an undergraduate. I didn't even know that this concept of HSI existed when I graduated in 2000. I attended a Research One university as an undergraduate, and my experience is probably very common. I encountered culture shock from my home community to my college environment. It was challenging. I really kind of think about it. I was like, wow, I kind of succeeded by trial and error. And thankfully, I had friends who were trying things and we were trying to figure it out together. And we were fortunate in that way to be able to reach the destination of college graduation. And while it was challenging, it was also very transformative for me. And it really became the place for me where I realized, wow, the educational opportunities that this experience is providing me, folks from my home community didn't have access to that. They didn't even have the opportunity to go to college in the same way. And so for me, that really sparked this commitment to say, how do I now work towards making sure that other folks who look like me have the opportunity to go to college and try to realize their own dreams and realize that there's a world even beyond what they can imagine. And so for me, that is something that college provides, is really this transformative potential. And so for me, that was what my professional background was. I was a TRIO, I worked in TRIO. I was an upward bound counselor in San Diego. I also did outreach in the Bay Area for a small private school. And that for me just further affirmed the commitment to try to increase access and opportunity for students from low-income first-gen backgrounds, particularly Latinx students. Again, lack of awareness that there was this thing of HSIs that existed out there. It wasn't until I went to graduate school that I learned there was this thing called HSIs. And it was in that experience of knowing that at that point in time, I really did want to conduct research and produce research that would improve opportunities for Latinx students, that I realized, well, it's got to include HSIs because that's where the students are going. And at that time, we were still learning, what does HSI mean? How do we define it? And for me, one of my first studies was actually at an emerging HSI. And it was in speaking with students that they were starting to talk about this thing about when their college became an HSI, this was going to mean a change to better support those students. And that for me really started to spark this idea that, okay, students can tell us, give us some ideas about what this HSI thing could be. And so for me, that was the origins of thinking about students' experiences and their outcomes as a way to think about what servingness can mean. Again, without the language of servingness, right? Because that term didn't get created until 2019, right? When Gina Garcia and colleagues published that particular article. Regardless, for me, this idea of thinking about students in that view of what does serving them mean was there from that moment on. And I share here for me, I had the opportunity back in 2013, 10 years ago, to teach a first-year seminar through Channel Islands HSI grant. And I asked students in that first day, what is the purpose of college? And they said many things that probably won't surprise us here, but do inspire or did inspire me. They were thinking about this as like a place to get their career, move forward. It was also a place for them to become independent. And then there was someone who said, this is a place where I'm going to get to break patterns of poverty, break patterns where women are not, in my family, not, kind of independent. And that again, for me was that affirmation. Students are looking for transformation, right? For me, that reaffirmed this here. Every time I teach an undergraduate class, I begin with that question: why are you here? What is the purpose? And so this is the first time that I taught an undergrad class here at UC Davis, and very similar things, different responses, but some of them very similar. Being taken serious, being resistant to what society thinks that I'm capable of. So kind of that resistant capital was there as well. And so for me, my most recent kind of iteration of kind of this continued like thinking of what does servingness mean, especially from a perspective of students, came more recently in 2023, earlier this year, when I got to teach an HSI seminar with a small group of graduate students. And they prompted me to think about what does this mean for grad students at an institution that's striving to become an HSI at UC Davis. So for me, these notions of like, what does servingness means requires immense reflection and continued growth, right? Because again, not having gone to a school that was an HSI, I wasn't even aware of what HSI was. We're having to rebuild and reimagine what servingness can and should be, right? And that can look, and so we're all actors in that process, but that also requires for us to reflect what does it mean and also retool for ourselves, like how do we continue to elevate our own consciousness of what servingness is. So now we know, again, that servingness from the Garcia et al. Framework, so Gina Garcia and Anne-Marie Nunez and Vanessa Sanson in 2019 did a deeper dive into looking at the research on HSIs to understand, well, how do we understand what servingness is? What does it mean to serve students in an HSI context? And in their review of the literature, they came up with these buckets, if you will, of ways that different folks think about servingness. Folks think about servingness in terms of the policies, right? Again, how is the federal government defining HSI and how different actors are influencing that notion of serving outside of the university. Within kind of this middle bucket is like, what is the institution itself doing to engage in servingness? And here they talk about these as structures for serving. So these can be things like the curriculum. Are we changing the curriculum to be more culturally responsive to meet the needs of students today? It can also mean, are we hiring more faculty to reflect the students? Are we hiring and supporting staff to support the students? Is our programming in line with what our students need? So it really kind of thinks about what are the structures or opportunities that the university and actions that the university is taking to create change. So that's another way that we can think about servingness from the perspective of the institution. But we can also think about servingness from the perspective of individuals and how they experience that institution. This is where I mentioned, for me, my awareness of HSI or what it can mean to serve started from the perspective of students who were grappling with what this could mean, and really has been like my career for the most part, really thinking about how students are thinking about this. So the research has often told us that servingness can be shown from the validation that students feel from these structures. So do students feel that they are validated on campus? Sometimes that may mean, do they have access to Spanish speaking peers, faculty, or folks who will understand them? Do they have mentorship and support groups? At the same time, there's the antithesis, what I would say, of servingness, which is that too often students still continue to encounter racism and discrimination on our colleges and universities. So that begs the question, if students are reporting that, is that servingness? No, likely not, right? We should be disrupting racism, but too often we do know that students encounter discrimination, microaggressions, even in HSIs. Another way that we can think about servingness is through the outcomes that we're producing. Are students graduating? Are students having a high GPA? Are they moving on to get jobs, right? All of these matter, especially within the community college context, right? What are those outcomes that matter? And are we meeting those outcomes and really meeting our academic objectives? However, there's also another element of education is far more than just the academic or far more than just the social mobility. For many students, it can also be a point of liberation, a point of empowerment for them to want to create change or to elevate their critical consciousness. And so they also talk about servingness should also mean more than not, there should also be non-academic outcomes that we're thinking about and striving for so that we really are elevating the success of students to the next level. So their model really provides a structure or a template, if you will, for institutions to think about, well, where are areas that we can enhance our servingness? Is it at the structures inside of the university, some of the actions that the university takes? Or is it including or understanding the experiences of students? Or looking more deeply at the outcomes as well, whether they be academic or non-academic. So it really is all encompassing, and then institutions can think about these are the areas that maybe we want to enhance further. So I think it gives us a great model to guide us in anchoring notions of servingness at a campus level and guide future efforts. So what do we know from research on servingness within community colleges per se? I'll just quickly mention the Garcia framework is really a scan or a representation of how research had looked at HSIs across all any kind of institution, 2-year, 4-year, public, private, as long as it was centered within HSIs. But we know that HSI is going to intersect with the other identities that our institutions have. And so what we have also seen is several studies focused specifically on community colleges, knowing that there's nuances or differences within this context that may differ somewhat from the 4-year sector. Recently, Dr. Erin Doran published in Community College Review, what does servingness mean within the community college context? And one of the things that she mentioned is that servingness should permeate the multiple missions within the community college. It should permeate the transfer pathway. It should permeate the community engagement. It should permeate the career and technical pathway, so that it really should account for servingness across the institution and the multiple missions. And she presents some ideas about how colleges and universities can think about that. Community colleges can think about that more deeply. We also know from research at the community colleges that, unfortunately, like in many of our colleges and universities, there is a persistent underrepresentation of Latinx faculty relative to the Latinx students that are enrolled on a campus. And so while we make progress, it's been a very incremental progress over time. And when we look at the ratio between Latinx students to Latinx faculty, we're talking about like 200, almost 300 to 1. So we have a high need, right? And that doesn't even include looking at staff, looking at administrators, right? So those gaps persist within that representation. We also know the important role of faculty, right? Faculty can really be the transformative agent for student success. And we know that faculty can be institutional agents, meaning that they broker information for students and really elevate them to a level of success. And so that just reinforces our need to make sure that we get more faculty who are inclined to understand their role as being those kinds of change agents for students and hire them, whether they be Latino or not, in order to really kind of think about servingness within the community colleges. When we look at student experiences and outcomes, we see a variety of studies that also highlight some of the things that we know more broadly. Recently, Cynthia Alcantar and Edwin Hernandez really highlighted how within community colleges in California, again, the importance of faculty validating students, really empowering them and putting them on a path of success and helping them honor their own lived experiences and their own cultural assets that they bring into the community college. On the flip side, I'll just mention one of the studies I did earlier was really reinforcing how, unfortunately, in some community colleges, perceived discrimination continues among Latinx students as well as Asian American students. And the way I explain it is that our institutions often mimic our society, right? So how would we expect that our institutions may differ? But I think that still places a responsibility on HSIs to say, how can we disrupt some of these patterns of perceived discrimination or racism within society? We know with very recent studies as well, that there is this persistence of anti-Blackness, of anti-Indigenous racism, and other forms of oppression like homophobia, transphobia within community colleges that are HSIs. And so is that servingness if we are continuing to uphold systems of oppression within our colleges and universities? Probably not, right? Probably that's one of those structures or elements that we should work to change to really make these environments more transformative. When we look at outcomes, an earlier study by Francis Contreras and Gil Contreras looking at the community colleges in California, they find that degree completion gaps, that includes both those students that were pursuing a 2-year degree, an associate's degree, or transferring, that there were persistent gaps between Latinx students and non-Latinx students. So that again raises this question, we have work to do in order to really elevate servingness when it comes to outcomes. However, there's good news too, though, is that some of the research that Anne Marie Nunez and other colleagues have also done does seem to show that those Latinx students that go to Hispanic serving community colleges tend to transfer at higher rates than their peers who do not go to HSCCs. So that's something for us to continue to look at and think about, how do we model more of that in the other missions, right, of the colleges and universities, what's happening in these transfer rates that maybe we can adopt and model for the other areas where there is areas for growth and opportunity. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time also thinking about servingness in our region. And what are other campuses doing that we might also learn from, or that the district can learn from, and really kind of elevate collective efforts across the region. We know that from what I can tell, 3 of your campuses meet the eligibility for HSI according to the Excelencia list. 1 of your colleges is an emerging HSI, meaning that it will soon meet that eligibility as well. So in a few years, your entire district will be an HSI district, right? We know that Sac State has been an HSI for quite some time and has been doing a lot of work. And UC Davis, while we are not an HSI, we have been doing work for more than a decade to try to achieve that effort, but we have engaged in a lot of strategic actions in order to really think about what does servingness mean now and even far into the future once we do hit the designation. So I wanted to share a little bit about each of these campuses and what I've learned over time. That means that servingness is alive and well in our region, right? So I want us to maybe think about as we move towards the latter part of the discussion, like what can it look like as well moving forward? So here is a highlight of some of the things that are coming out of Sacramento State. How many of you saw this article that came out back in April in the SACB? No, okay. So here's this article that was specifically about Sacramento State and what does HSI mean in their campus. And part of what prompted this article, or one of the main elements that was covered in this article, is a HSI photo voice project that is a project that 2 faculty sought and secured funding for. And what they did, and so this is a project that was co-led by Doctora Amber Gonzalez and Dr. Kevin Ferreira Valier, and a team of student researchers. So for 2 years, with 2 different teams of student researchers. Those students led a project to examine, what does servingness mean at Sac State? They took photographs, made sense of those photographs, and also interfaced with administrators to teach them about what servingness was and where were areas for growth. And so it really is an opportunity to empower or use student voice to transform the institution. Some of the things that they did in the work that I could observe, I was at one of their events last year, and the students had showcased in their like their MU, their student center, that the multicultural center was, the students couldn't even necessarily tell that it was open, that the lighting was not the best, that compared that to the coffee that was next door that had all of this advertising and was very welcoming, that these were stark, right? And the administrators there listening to this said, we can change that. We can improve the lighting to make this more inviting. And so that was the power right there, right? When you bring students to tell us what can servingness look like more here, and you have administrators willing to listen, some things might be very simple fixes, like improving lighting, might make something feel more welcoming. That's a resource that we have to support students. So I encourage you to read this article, because it really does provide some ways to center student voices, essential for us to think about what does it mean to transform our institutions to better serve students moving forward. So that's some of the work that I wanted to highlight from Sac State. In terms of UC Davis, as I mentioned, we are not yet an HSI. We have been on a path knowing that this is our future. In California, Gina and I have often laughed at, and Gina's always told me, like, every university or college is going to be an HSI. You really have to try hard in the state, right, to not be one. You really have to resist it. And so our campus has not resisted it and has really been thinking for quite some time, what does it mean for us to be an HSI when we meet that designation, and what does it mean for what we need to do now? And so one of the things that our campus did back in 2018, 2019, our chancellor charged a task force to say, we are going to hit the designation in the near future. What does this mean for what we have to do day one and moving forward? What is our vision? What is our goal with HSI? And so this was a large task force that had representation from faculty, staff, grad students, undergraduate students, as well as many administrators. And what was created was this massive report that basically outlines our future, ideally, of what we imagine servingness should mean on our campus, and what that means for changing policy, or what that means for particular outcomes that we want to achieve. And so it really sets this context. I highlight this picture here because one of our colleagues from the Chicano Studies Department, Dr. Natalia Dibsosa, she led a team of grad students and undergrads to understand, well, how do students on our campus, how will they define servingness? And they did it through a multimodal process. They talked to students, but they also had opportunities for them to create art and express themselves either through poetry, spoken word, or art. And this here was one of the examples that came from one of those events where students were sharing their insights. Not surprisingly, students talked about campus climate, improving campus climate, seeing more representation from faculty to look like them, and really feeling that their experience at the university was going to put them on long-term success in their ability to give back to their families and communities, which we know matters for many of our students. And so that pushes us as the university to say, what does that mean about how do we meet that goal then, if this is something that students are looking for? And so I mentioned this here because this has been an element of our campus's journey towards servingness. It's one element. We have yet to meet the designation, but we've been thinking about this. we've been taking actions to say, these are additional things that we can do. During the time that I've been here at UC Davis, I've seen the development of El Centro Chicano. We did not have a center before. That has now, we are celebrating the 6th year come this fall of the center, and it has become a hub for many activities. And I can't even imagine that just up until 6 years ago, this didn't exist, right? This didn't exist. This was not part of the structure that we had built, but now it seems indispensable and a critical part of our Servingness journey. And I share this because there are certain things that we don't have to wait for us to be HSIs to already be doing the work, right? Our journeys towards Servingness are ongoing and can proceed when we hit the HSI designation. I was just talking to my colega, Doctora Dib Sosa, right before coming here, and we were talking about, well, the moment when we hit that designation, whether it be this year, next year, one, it's going to be a moment of celebration, but it doesn't mean an arrival. It just means the next stage of our Servingness journey that we will have to document and move forward from to really move to enact some of the things from our task force report. So this is what we've been doing as a campus, thinking about, but we haven't also been only doing it at a campus level. A few years ago, the system, the UC system, also created the UCHSI initiative. How many of you have heard of the UCHSI initiative? Okay, we have one person, right? So what the HSI initiative is a recognition that at the moment, 5 of our undergraduate campuses of the 9 are HSIs. The other 4 will be HSIs in the near future. And so as we are now really a system of Hispanic serving research institutions, we have to think about, what does that mean? What does that mean about how do we transform this system, these institutions that really were not created with students of color in mind historically, right? And so what the system-wide initiative is a learning community for campus representatives from each of the campuses to come and share and learn from each other about what is the Servingness journey of each campus. What are they learning what are they hoping to do? How can they share resources or information? At times it's been a point of advocacy as well. I'll share one example. A few years ago, undocumented students did not count for the designation. We wouldn't include them, right? But for many of our campuses, that is a large part of our Latinx communities. So what does it mean when we say, well, we can't include you, but we're serving you, right? So there was a concrete advocacy effort across campuses to say, we need to change this policy. And so my understanding is that that policy has been evolved. And now we do include Latinx undocumented students. And so I think this is the power that comes when you have units working and supporting each other to say, how can we elevate this idea of servingness, recognizing the unique missions, the unique histories of our campuses. And so this in a lot of ways reminds me of some of maybe what you're thinking of building, right, with this district-wide effort to say, how do we as campuses as a whole, charged with similar goals, how do we elevate that work, right, beyond just what's happening on our campus? How do we support each other? One of the ways that we also see that happen with our campuses is that we have these virtual and in-person convenings where we share with each other, and this fosters connections and identify ideas for transformation. One of the things that we've done, we've had at least 2 of these. COVID-19 happened in there, so things got paused for a lot, but we have these HSI showcases. And in March, UC Davis hosted ours. Again, we're not yet an HSI, but we want to share our journey towards HSI and what it means. And so we invited campus partners, as well as our other UC sister campuses, to come and say, do you want to learn about what we've been doing? Back in 2019, we did that at Santa Cruz. We went to Santa Cruz and we learned from them what has it meant for you. And so I think documenting and learning from these convenings is an element of elevating like our continual learning about what servingness can mean, and also advocating and supporting as a larger unit to say, these are the needs that we see moving forward about how we can better support our students. For us moving forward, given our mission of research, I see this as the direction. What does this mean for our mission of producing research? What does servingness mean with respect to research? And so this is a part that I'm excited to see. We don't know what that means yet, but we hope to build it together and really create research that will help us transform our institutions and not just produce scholarship for journal articles, but to really say it becomes a guide to help us transform our campuses. So I'm going to breeze through something here because I'm now just noticing the time. But I wanted to just share with you as well, kind of going back to, so for me, I see these as examples of like campus level notions of servingness, more like system level notions of servingness. And I just wanted to take a really quick step back to, again, as I mentioned, notions of servingness have to be like a continual reflection process. And for me, I continue to think about this. So I'll just do a really quick individual one. So I teach an undergrad class on issues in higher education. And just this past winter, I created this assignment where I was really inspired by what Sac State had done with their team of student researchers. And I knew I couldn't mimic that because their work is powerful. But I really wanted to elevate the consciousness of students about what does servingness mean and how can I learn as a faculty member, one, about how they're thinking about it, but also about what we can learn about how our campus can make better enhanced servingness. And so I prompted students to take 3 pictures with this prompt to say, what does servingness look like or not on our campus, either thinking about our HSI identity, our future HSI identity, or our Onapisi identity, because we are an Onapisi. And so I just want to see what would they come up with. So I'm going to give you a snippet of like what I learned from this assignment really quickly. Students talked about spaces. They talked about El Centro being a place of servingness. They talked about the Student Community Center, the AB 540 Center. This is Thompson Hall is our ethnic themed dorm called Casa Cuauhtemoc. They also talked about the importance of having these land acknowledgements physically to acknowledge our history of land dispossession of Native American communities and saying that's indicating servingness. This is the EOP building where students often get support. And so they also indicated that. This is our Asian American Native Pacific Islander Retention Initiative office. And so students also indicated this. And so while this portrays this like notion of servingness through space, there were also some interesting things here. This here is the stairway up to El Centro. And so one student said, if you overlook this small sign, how do I know that that's up here? Why isn't there color drawing me up here? Another student said, what about our students who have mobility issues? How accessible is this? And they said, well, you have to go around to even get to the 2nd floor. So how do we think about intersectionality? So I think that highlights an important area of like, while we may have these spaces, students still give us an element to elevate our awareness even further. For this one here, this is an office currently, and students talked about how can you meet the needs of an entire community in one room? That's powerful, right? Thinking about that. Students also talked about the curriculum, whether it be like our ethnic studies departments, different journal publications, or what a particular class covered in a week that in their mind indicated servingness because they could see themselves in these readings in this particular week. They also talked about student organizations and their own work that they do to recruit, outreach, and support and retain each other. And here I just want to highlight, again, because I said they could either talk about our emerging HSI identity or Onapisi identity. And so a few of them, this one was a picture of an advertisement for an Asian American sorority, and over here for an Asian Pacific Islander queer student group. And so for me, this highlighted again, this idea of intersectionality. It isn't just about recognizing the racialized experiences of students, but also the intersecting identities and how those are unique and the ways that they saw student organizations playing that role. We also saw it in the representation in art and food. Students talked about that. Murals. Here, this is in our student bookstore. We have stoles that represent different communities. And I didn't even know that this existed, but a student said, this makes me feel like there's a space for everybody here. And here, I'll just mention that one student talked about the pantry on our campus and how that really is a notion of servingness, but also feeling that there were certain foods that weren't indicative of the diaspora of students, right? So, and then when we were talking about it in class, one of our Central American students then said, yeah, I feel invisible a lot because I don't see Black beans. I don't see certain things. And so that really, again, prompted this notion of intersectionality and the importance of thinking about the diversity that even exists within our student populations that we serve. One of the things that I took away from this assignment, from my own reflection and learning, was that while we have all of these different structures, there were many students, and actually I can think of one transfer student who said, I didn't even know all of this existed here and I'm graduating already. Is that serving this? So that really is something that I think I have to grapple with. How do we make a move on that? Well, we may build things, they may still not be meeting the intended goal, right? Or meeting all of the students when they need the information. So I want to wrap up with a few things. So there's a few slides here. So I'll just speak for about 10 more minutes, if that's okay. All right, so some of the things I see is opportunities for serving this in the region. And I think places that really your HSI committee and your district can really help us lead in are in some of these areas. We know that Latinx college going enrollment rates in the surrounding counties. This is pre-COVID-19. This is for the high school graduating classes of 2017, 2018, 2019. These are the different counties that are in our region. We know that in statewide, most of the students, when they do go to college, they're going to a community college. And then we have here some students going to our CSUs, our UCs, and then private and out of states. But 41% of Latinx students are going to no college right after high school. The patterns in Sacramento and El Dorado County mimic very much similarly those patterns. And then there's variation from the other surrounding counties in the area. What I take from this graphic is that even before the pandemic, there was still a tremendous opportunity to serve our Latinx students, right? Because 41%, 42, 43% in Sacramento and El Dorado counties, which are the counties that we largely serve, right, in this district, are not even pursuing college at all. So they're doing something else. What happens to those students if they're not going straight into college? Do we have on-ramps for them later? Maybe when they're 21, when they're 25, 30, and maybe ready to come back to school or ready at that time. So I think here for me, this indicates a tremendous opportunity for us to elevate our work of encouraging more Latinx students to pursue college. And the community college, again, is the primary gateway for the majority of students. That's a ripe opportunity. We also know that enrollment, I assume enrollment, we're still grappling with enrollment declines after COVID-19, right, across the district. So what does that mean for how we need to enhance enrollment, outreach, and recruitment for Latinx students since the pandemic? And so some of our recent research that I've done with my colleagues, I think starts to point to some of this. Some of this is specifically from four-year college going, but we collected data from students right at fall 2020 when the pandemic was happening. This was a historic moment in UC because it was the first year that there was Latinx students constituted the majority of admissions. But then it was also when COVID happened. And so I was concerned, like, how are we going to support these students to still come to like a UC, specifically UC Davis in our example. And so my colleagues and I started to interview students, interview families as they were making decisions. And so here are some of the takeaways that we feel can be helpful to colleges as we really figure out how to elevate enrollment for Latinx students, including in the community college, where we've seen those large declines, right, for Latinx communities. That we have to keep in mind that COVID-19 continues to have an impact for our communities, right? And that those are going to be long-term impacts for some families, right? So how do we not forget the pandemic, right? Even a year from now, 2 years from now, currently, if your campus is anything like ours, it's kind of sometimes feels like we forgot that the pandemic happened. We're just trying to get back to business as usual, right? And we can't let go of that because this impacts students' decision-making, whether they go to college right now, where they go to college. And so that's something to consider. But families, Latinx families continue to value education. That's what we learned. Even in spite of all of the challenges that COVID was bringing, they were still supporting their students to pursue a college education. So not losing sight of that. Also, from this brief here, where this data comes from. So I do have the QR code. This is a recent publication that is based on community colleges and kind of thinking about outreach and recruitment in community colleges specifically. We really need to be more intentional and proactive in marketing and recruiting to our Latinx students. We can't just assume that they're going to come to us or that they're even hearing about community college from their local high schools. So how can we think creatively about that intentional outreach, and that if it doesn't happen in the high school, how can we outreach to the community or wherever those sources of information that students are getting once we consider them adult learners, because they may have just missed that information when they were in high school. The importance of cultivating and conveying a sense of community for students on campus, right? If you can walk on campus and feel like you're going to be supported, you see yourself, you feel like this is the place where you're going to thrive, that can be the deciding factor if you enroll at a particular college or go to college at all, right? So how can we think about that? And also, how do we support you, the institutional agents who are often doing the work of advocating for college pathways? How do we also think about supporting our staff who are the front line of supporting students, because they're the ones doing the work? You're the ones doing the work. How do we provide resources to encourage and support that work more intentionally? Also, as I started to point out a little bit in the research about Hispanic serving community colleges, and also some of the insights that I was getting from those pictures that students took in that assignment in my class, I think the importance of centering racial equity and intersectionality is a direction that we have to move forward in intentionally at HSIs, as individual campuses, but also regionally. We know from research that there's limited structural change at HSIs, unfortunately. Oftentimes, Latinx faculty remain underrepresented. Even though we make slight incremental increases, it's still not at the pace that we need. And we see that consistently. We also see often that the curriculum doesn't necessarily change to be more culturally responsive. So how can we do better there? Given those limited structural changes, we need to center racial equity in our change efforts. We also know that even with HSI funding, some of it is often race evasive, meaning that it doesn't talk about race specifically in any sort of meaningful way. And I often say, how can we expect to achieve racial equity without race consciousness, right? So that's something to think about there as well. And then, of course, that there is like this notion of needing to think about the students' intersecting needs. And I do want to call your attention or put out information about a special topic collection that Gina Garcia and I co-edited earlier this year with 8 articles from authors talking about intersectionality at HSIs. It is an open access ARA open issue. And so there are 8 wonderful articles there, including an introduction that she and I co-authored about what we think is the next direction of like intersectional research and practice that needs to happen at HSIs. Next, how do we think about linking servingness to our campus and district strategic plans? We all have strategic plans, right, about what we're trying to achieve and aim. So how can we think about servingness as not different from that, but intertwined with our strategic plans? And so I know that your campuses have been successful, right, with HSI grant getting, and that's great. And you've been doing outstanding work. So how do we get the campus to institutionalize those efforts when you've had success, right? So thinking about how to elevate that. And one way to think about it is, how do we align indicators and structures of servingness with your existing campus and district plans? So one way that I want to visualize this is from our report, task force report. These were the goals. These were the 4 major goals that our strategic vision, well, this is our strategic vision that the campus has. Our chancellor calls it to boldly go. That's our strategic plan. And so here are our 5 goals from the HSI efforts to say where they're intertwined with what we want to achieve. And so kind of making it clear, these things are not different. They're the same thing. They are aligned because then they are central, right, to all of our transformational efforts. Also, how can we establish a forward-thinking vision of what servingness can mean at the next level, at the campus level, but really at the district level? What will success look like for you as a district to say we are meeting our servingness goal? I also noticed that on your main district page, for each strategic plan, there's like the strategies that each campus is engaging, right? So where's HSI represented in there? A lot of those goals align with like servingness. So how can that be fused, and how can you develop this forward-thinking vision of what servingness can look like across the district and the region for that matter? And then lastly, developing structures for continual learning and transformational change at that individual level, at the campus level, but also at the district level. How do we keep that reflective and ongoing learning process for us to create new structures for servingness for the next 40 years? And with that, I want to just put a shout out, or publicize this particular opportunity for continual learning. Next Wednesday, Gina Garcia and I we've co-authored this report along with 2 graduate students from UC Davis, Mayra Nunez Martinez and Alicia Benpomo Garcia, who's now a faculty at Cabrillo College. And to think about what is the history of Hispanic serving community colleges in the state? What are the outcomes that we see across these Hispanic serving community colleges? And how does the vision for success within the community college align with notions of servingness? And so this should be a fun activity or a fun event, and the release for this report that we hope will be a useful resource for community colleges and moving forward your goals towards servingness. And I hope that as we move forward collectively, we continue to partner to think about servingness at a regional level in order to really meet or develop that structure that we need to meet the needs of our students on our campuses and also within our region. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and look forward to engaging with you.
I want to do a quick check in to see if there's any questions. Looks like we don't have any questions so far. We can give a little bit of time to see if any questions pop up.
Right on your mind.
I gotta go, I got a student in each theater, so.
Thank you for stopping by. Alright, it looks like we don't have any questions so far, so, we'll hang out for a little bit, but thank you so much. Oh, yeah, and even him not.
Oh, well, okay, so I'm a nursing professor at ARC. And I've noticed, I mean, we do have some Hispanic students in my program, but there is very much a dearth of Black and Latinx students in the nursing program. And so I think that really points to the pipeline from high school to the prerequisites to nursing. And so as a nursing professor, I realized that, we have to get them, before they get to my classroom, because they're not there yet in the numbers that would be, even remotely proportional. So I'm just kind of wondering, as a nursing professor, or any community college professor, what do we do to identify and strengthen pipelines that help reach out to high school students and let them know? For me, specifically about nursing and what a great opportunity it is. I really believe in the community college program to really, as soon as they graduate, they're making six figures. I mean, it's right there. We just have to connect people to it.
Yeah, I think that one thing that comes to mind, and then I definitely, I'm sure folks may have additional insights, is even thinking about, like, with the HSI designation, are there funding opportunities to develop programs at a local level to start to kind of like develop that pipeline? So whether that means partnering with within the college, right, with those prerequisites, are there ways that we can support students to make sure that they do, advance through those successfully? And even before that, in the local high schools, are there ways to kind of partner with other existing programs that may,
This has the Shines program.
Mhm.
And I know that UC Davis, I think, next week it is hosting like an outreach thing, and it's interesting because all these really expensive for-profit colleges are participating, and our little community college can't even afford to send one person there hardly. And it's, for me, I'm like, you could send, $160,000 for a private school, or you could get it for free from community college. So I tend to really, I just feel like maybe our pipeline is not as robust as it could be, or I just am not aware of it.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd have a question is like, who can go outreach and recruit, right? Like, is there a unit? Who's the unit on campus that can go, right? Because you as a faculty member, I would assume maybe won't be the direct line, but are there resources that then could be funneled to say, we need at least one representative to convey, right, this opportunity?
Maybe they're in the audience, but you do need to connect it.
Yeah, so like that, I think some of that intentional recruitment, right? Because like, again, I think that, as you point out, a lot of for-profits will be present, right? And students are looking for often clear information about what is the most affordable, but also what is the clearest pathway for me to my goal, right? And so how can we funnel that information? If the community college is a great place for that, which I know it is, and I know that a lot of the community colleges in the region have good reputations for their nursing programs. So it's like a win-win, but how do we align that information to reach those target audiences, right? Those students that are at these kinds of events, as well as possibly thinking about programs that we can develop to kind of close some of those loops oftentimes that do happen, and like when things are so disparate, right? Yeah. I don't know if that provides some.
Yeah, some videos, I just wish I had more time to work on it. I'm gonna make them.
So I'm a Davis alum. So back in that day, definitely the center didn't exist. What was the name of the center?
El centro, what
The
is,
central,
yeah,
right?
it's what, how we lovingly call it.
Yeah. So I wish it did go back then, but you're not an HSI, right, institution, so I'm guessing you're not getting funds for all that. But yet you do have resources, and you have created or built this relationships, right? And I feel that I've been in an institution that they are HSI, but I just feel that the collaboration, the relationships, you know what I mean, between faculty, staff, and all that, it's not quite there. How do you do it at Davis to have all this, implement all this, you know, resources, initiatives and stuff like that, and build that relationship without getting all this funding? And I mean, how did that central came about? Who's funding? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm assuming it has to do with some sort of relationships and I don't know. What would be your advice for an institution that really need to work on working together?
Mhm. So I think that the committee, right, is one of those places to kind of think about like what are ways to galvanize, right? And think about supporting more of that interconnection. What I can share from my perspective of this particular, like say the center as an example, was also bold leadership. The person who championed the building of this center and others on campus was our previous Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, who said we lack really like any racial equity lens in our retention efforts. And if we keep working separately, we are never going to fix issues of retention. And so one of the things that she did during her tenure as the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs said, I'm going to create these retention initiatives. And we're going to have a collaboration of faculty, staff, administrators come up with the plan for what does it mean to link these different retention efforts that are often like, they're not connected, right? They're just kind of operating on their own. And students are having to figure that out on their own. And so I think for that particular example, it took that leadership to say, we need to do something here differently. We need to link these resources. And then in addition to that, advocated to say a space is going to help us actually be the hub, where then students know if I'm running into academic probation, if I'm about to be kicked out, right? Because that does happen on our campus, then that can be a place, a one-stop shop for us to try to support students. So I think that was part of it as well, was like a leadership to say, and also like pressuring those who have the funding to say, this aligns with our efforts for HSI. It aligns for our other initiatives on the campus. So again, linking it to like, if we're trying to eliminate gaps, then HSI is central to that. And so then it becomes more of a like pressing issue, then whatever solutions we're proposing ideally become part of that, and to say, you can't do this without doing that. I don't know if that helps a little bit. I would say that, I wouldn't say that it's I also don't want to convey that, like, because we are a large institution too. And so we also have that need to, how do we galvanize faculty and staff? I know that we have a strong Latino staff association, and it is a Latino staff and faculty association. But what I have heard, and I know, is that the faculty are often not able to like really engage because we're so disparate. We're kind of everywhere. And so I can relate to the faculty idea, because we are pulled in 50 million directions, right? But that's not to say to excuse that, but to say we need to do better too, right? Because sometimes it does mean that we would actually be stronger in terms of advocating for change if we had more of that communal effort. But I think this is one of those places where leadership really matters, and aligning those things that we know that need to happen with those broader strategic goals, because they're like intertwined. I tell you, I can imagine that going to Davis at a time when there was not the central, like I can't even imagine that, right? Because, but it did, that is how, when I started working at Davis, it didn't exist. Now it does, and it seems so indispensable. Now, let me also tell you, right, like it is centrally located. That isn't where it started. There was advocating that had to happen. And now students will tell you the space is too small. It doesn't meet the entire needs, because sometimes they do have to turn people away. And so now our next question is, well, how do we really meet the needs of students when our capacity is like, it exceeds our capacity to be able to do it in ways that we would hope to do it.
So it sounds like students are very engaged in advocating as well.
They have been in the past. I will mention, when I first came in fall 2014, and there were some HSI forums to inform the community about, we have these HSI goals, we want to talk about this. This is what an HSI is. These are our completion rates. These are our enrollment rates. What are ways that we can kind of address these challenges? Students were there. Our student activists were there, pushing the envelope. And I will never forget, one of their statements was always, why are you waiting to meet this designation to serve us? We're here now. And so I think that stays, that in some ways has stayed with us, right? Because to say, we can't wait if we know some of these things that we need, right? And so how can we, collectively advocate for that? And I would say that, it unfortunately, too often, there isn't enough support, right, for these kinds of efforts to build collective community and advocate, just because a lot of times we're spread so thin, right? We're being pulled in 50 million directions. But if institutions can do more of that, and also have leaders, right, advocating, hopefully that helps to create some of that change.
Yeah, so my question, I did want to voice a question in the chat. So it's from Andre Ketan. Marcella, as a former UCD staff member and a current Sac City administrator, the difference in available resources that we can use for supporting our students is really different. What do you suggest community colleges do for those projects and activities that require funds and resources?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? So there are the disparate resources. I think that this is, I think, one of the places where like HSI funding, right, becomes indispensable, right? How pursuing some of these grants help to bring in some of that capacity building, but then it also becomes the responsibility of the institution, ideally, to institutionalize that, right? Once that grant is completed and there's evidence of its success, how can we institutionalize it or figure out how to move the funding model, right, in order to create that support and resources. I'm hopeful that also with like, the student equity plans, that how can this interface with like the resources being funneled in places to support students and the needs that connect with Servingness, as well as like the alignment of the vision for success. And I think that this is also where like, on a broader level, like the public's advocacy for continued support for community colleges coming from the legislators, right? Making sure that community colleges retain the support and resources, not just retain, but get the resources that they need to really continue to do the work, right, of educating the mass of Latinx undergraduates in our state that become the future civic leaders in our state, that become the future transfer students, that become the future nurses and professionals. So I think that also puts an onus on us, on the public, in supporting more of that advocacy to ensure that the funding continues to be funneled to the community college. I might also add, are there innovative ways for like, again, if we think from a regional perspective, to share resources, right? Between not just like within a district, but across, like intersegmentally. And are there examples of that we can pull from? I don't know of any regionally, but why can't we imagine to rebuild something that looks different, right? So I think those kinds of things, I know that there are like smaller programmatic things, but can we reimagine a restructuring or a sharing of resources that looks different than the ways that our current structures like force us to like engage?
Is it okay if I say something?
That's
Okay, I am so sorry. I've had to cut in and out of the meeting because of other things going on in the office. But so I'm sorry if this was already addressed, but I am super excited about the success coaches. I work here at CRC in the business services office, and I am super excited about the success coaches and being able to direct students to them, because there are so many services, I mean, amazing services, that it would just be so easy for students to miss them and feel like they're already connected to everything. But the success coaches, that's one of their primary roles, is to connect them. But I know that they're really set up for returning students and first year students. So I kind of feel like maybe some of our students that have been here a year or two might be missing some of those connections that the success coaches can link them to. But I just, for whoever's out there, if you have new students, make sure to connect them to the success coaches so they can get connected to everything, because it's a huge resource where the teacher or a particular office might not have the ability to spend that much time with each student. But the success coach, that's one of their primary jobs. So they have time, to do that.
Thank you.
Add a little bit to that. So, well, some of our program, success coaches and directors are here. So like each, Consumers River College of Sac City have those programs to serve Latinx students that come from HSI grants. So like, we are here also trying to bring visibility to the programs that we already exist, but also think about like in the future, like how can this continue, So if, you're at your respective campus and you have questions, like we're also here to serve as liaisons to like the HSI kind of world as well. And then just also get more information to your campus if it's not there already.
Any other questions? I just want to do one more check-in. Don't think we have any other questions here. So I'm just going to move one slide over for those folks who need to
Fill out the survey. I believe this is how they're keeping track of like attendance for flex credit. So there's a QR code that will take you, and then also in the chat we have a link available for you, so you can fill that out. And we want to thank you for the time and coming out and giving us such wonderful and amazing information. And just echo what Melissa said, is that this is the goal that we're working as a district, welcoming ARC now as the newest HSI campus. And we thank you for sharing your knowledge, and we hope to continue to work together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I look forward to the progress. And I mean that in all sincerity, that I think that are thinking beyond what we even know is possible right now, like has to be done collectively and has to be done regionally, recognizing the different missions, but also the different resources. That's a reality, right? And that opens up a whole lot of can of worms of other conversations that we can chat about later or over a drink someday. Thank you.
There's also food if anyone wants to read
those are here.
Thank you so much.